If you judge it purely by the statistics, a US-Iran war looks inevitable and laughably one-sided. On one end stands the United States, the planet's only true military superpower, pouring close to $800 billion a year into defense, commanding a navy that can strike anywhere on Earth at a moment's notice, and an air force that effectively controls the skies. On the other end is Iran, a country choked by decades of sanctions, operating an outdated conventional air force and spending a defense budget that barely registers next to the Pentagon's ledger. On a spreadsheet, this doesn't look like a war. It looks like a routine operation. Desert Storm, Redux. But wars don't happen on spreadsheets. They happen in dust, in narrow valleys, in unforgiving mountains, and at the world's most dangerous geographic bottlenecks. If the question is whether the US military can hit and destroy targets inside Iran, the answer is straightforward. Absolutely. That capability is not in doubt. But the moment the question shifts to whether the United States could invade Iran, occupy it, and emerge victorious, the answer changes dramatically. And the honest answer is no. Worse than that, trying might not just end in defeat. It could trigger a geopolitical disaster so severe that America's status as a global superpower would be permanently damaged. To understand why, you have to stop staring at aircraft carriers and start studying the terrain. Because Iran is not merely a country on a map, it is a naturally engineered stronghold, one shaped over centuries to break invading empires. The first, and by far the most overwhelming challenge any American invasion force would face, isn't Iran's military, it's Iran itself, the land. This is not Iraq's open, flat desert, where armored units can surge forward at speed and exploit long sightlines. It's not Afghanistan's scattered valleys and fractured terrain. Iran is something else entirely. It is a geographic outlier, a country that functions like a giant, naturally fortified stronghold. Any serious ground invasion would almost certainly come from the south or the west, likely beginning with landings along the Persian Gulf. But the moment troops set foot on Iranian soil, they would slam straight into the Zagros Mountains. And these aren't just mountains in the casual sense. They are a vast, sprawling maze of stone, parallel ridgelines running nearly 1,000 miles long, forming a massive natural barrier around Iran's core. This terrain alone makes a ground invasion close to unworkable. Every route through the Zagros is a bottleneck. Every valley becomes a potential ambush zone. An advancing army would be forced to squeeze its heavy armor and supply lines through narrow, twisting roads where raw technological superiority stops mattering. A tank's range advantage means nothing when your view is blocked by sheer rock. Supply convoys become sitting ducks when roads only allow single-file movement and hostile forces can observe and strike from caves thousands of feet above. And this isn't theoretical. We've seen this exact geography defeat a modern army before. In 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq launched an invasion of Iran. At the time, Iraq fielded one of the most powerful militaries in the region and enjoyed broad backing from much of the Arab world, along with varying degrees of Western support. Their objective was Khuzestan, an oil-rich province right across the border. The plan was simple: hit hard, move fast, win quickly. Instead, the war dragged on for 8 years. What was meant to be a swift campaign turned into a prolonged slaughter that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Even with numerical advantages, external backing, and an Iran still reeling from revolution, Iraqi forces could not break through the Zagros. After nearly a decade of brutal fighting, the front lines barely moved. The mountains absorbed the invasion and shattered it. That history matters because if a neighboring army with short supply lines, regional support, and every incentive to succeed couldn't force its way through this terrain, the idea that the United States could transport an army halfway across the planet and do better borders on fantasy. The Zagros Mountains don't just slow an invader down, they transform even the most advanced military on Earth into a vulnerable, lumbering force, draining lives, time, and resources for every mile gained. But let's indulge the hypothetical for a moment. Let's assume the US military pulls off the impossible and somehow grinds its way through the Zagros Mountains. What lies beyond isn't triumph, it's punishment. On the other side waits the Dash de Lut and the Dash de Kavir, two of the most inhospitable landscapes on Earth. These aren't cinematic deserts of rolling sand. They are vast expanses of salt flats and scorched stone, places where recorded ground temperatures have approached 70 degrees Celsius, about 158 degrees Fahrenheit. This is terrain that doesn't just challenge soldiers, it actively destroys equipment. Extreme heat degrades electronics, strains engines, and drains the human body long before an enemy ever fires a shot. Simply moving across these deserts would mean extending supply lines hundreds of miles through open, exposed territory with no cover and no margin for error. And even if those deserts are crossed, the ordeal still isn't over. Rising in the north are the Alborz Mountains, a second massive barrier guarding the Caspian Sea coast. This region isn't just geographically significant, it's economically vital, rich in uranium, gold, zinc, and industrial infrastructure. Supplying forces across yet another mountain range would turn logistics and air resupply into a near impossible task. Iran, by design or by fate, is layered like a defensive onion, mountain, desert, mountain again, essentially a fortress nested inside another fortress, surrounded by an environmental moat of fire. But geography alone isn't why this war would be unwinnable. The true danger lies far beyond the battlefield. Iran doesn't just defend itself with terrain, it holds leverage over the global economy itself. And that leverage is the Strait of Hormuz. This is the real trump card. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide, yet roughly a quarter of the world's liquid petroleum supply and a significant share of global liquefied natural gas passes through it. This is not a shipping lane, it is the economic jugular of the industrial world. Iran's port city of Bandar Abbas sits within striking distance of these routes, barely 70 kilometers from the main shipping lanes. In the event of a U.S. invasion, Iran wouldn't limit its response to land combat. It would move to shut the strait down. And crucially, it wouldn't need a blue water navy to do it. For decades, Iran has invested in asymmetric strategies designed for one purpose: making the Strait of Hormuz unusable. Close that choke point, even temporarily, and the shockwaves wouldn't stay regional, they would ripple through every economy on Earth. Iran's greatest strength is that it never intends to fight the United States directly, or fairly. Instead, it fights through a vast network of proxy forces across the Middle East, turning any U.S. strike into a regional explosion of simultaneous wars, stretching from Israel to the Red Sea. American bases would come under attack, shipping lanes would be threatened, and missile defenses would be overwhelmed by cheap drones and missiles that cost a fraction of the interceptors used to stop them, creating a brutal war of economic attrition the U.S. cannot sustain. With every American base in the region within missile range, quiet backing from Russia and China, and the ever-present risk of nuclear escalation if the regime's survival is threatened, the conflict offers no path to victory. This is why the United States has relied on sanctions and covert action instead of invasion. Iran is not a war you win. It is a war that drains you until the cost becomes unbearable.